Glasses shattered against the tile, chairs tipped, and a chandelier trembled as if it might fall. The band cut off mid-song. In the middle of what was supposed to be my perfect Midwest wedding reception, my future father-in-law was storming through the ballroom, knocking over tables after catching his wife, the groom's mother, in the pantry with the MC. That's the moment etched into me. The crash of plates, the stunned gasps, the children ushered out as if chaos could be hidden. I stood frozen at the head table, veil slipping, napkin clenched in my hand. I was supposed to be the glowing bride, smiling through cake and toasts. Instead, I was watching the family I had just married into collapse in front of 200 guests. The day had begun so differently. A bright Saturday in June, the kind of weather you beg for when you book a venue a year out. The reception hall was all rustic timber beams and chandeliers, string lights over a patio that opened onto rolling fields. Brochures called it refined country elegance, and my mother-in-law, Lydia, had insisted nothing less would do. My family, teachers, nurses, ordinary people, thought the place was over the top, but they went along, proud that I had found someone who seemed to love me. Evan, my groom, was the kind of man who smiled easily, who made my third graders laugh when he visited my classroom, who never looked out of place whether he was talking to my dad about fishing or to his parents' friends about business. His father, Jack, was quiet strength, a man who owned car dealerships and carried himself like he could fix anything with his hands. His mother, Lydia, was the polished opposite, hosting charity galas and always looking camera-ready. Together they were the couple everyone admired, the ones you pointed to and said, "That's success." The ceremony itself was beautiful, flowers trailing from a wooden arch, vows about keeping promises when the porch light is the only light left. My parents cried. Evan squeezed my hand at always, and I believed it. When we kissed, it felt like the start of forever. The reception began with laughter and plenty of food, roast chicken, green beans with almonds, fresh rolls that split warm. Our MC, Vince, was a fast-talking entertainer hired to keep the evening moving. He cracked harmless jokes, teased cousins into dancing, and gave every toast the kind of timing that made even long stories sparkle. Lydia had picked him herself, saying, "He has energy. Energy makes a party." For a while it worked. My dad and I shared our dance. Evan's grandmother twirled on the floor, and even the shy cousins clapped along. Everything felt right, until Lydia disappeared. At first it was small. She wasn't in photos, wasn't at her table. Jack frowned at his watch, muttering. Guests shrugged it off. Fixing lipstick, someone guessed. Vince kept the show rolling, and no one questioned it. But then Vince vanished too. That's when Jack stood up. His walk was steady, deliberate, the walk of a man who already knew what he'd find. He pushed through the doors toward the kitchen corridor, and for a few minutes the hall held its breath. When he came back, he wasn't red with rage. He was pale, cold, eyes locked on the ground. He grabbed the nearest table and flipped it, plates and glasses exploding like firecrackers. The band cut off mid-chord. Guests gasped, some already rising from their chairs. "Check your closets," he barked, voice like thunder rolling across a field. "Check your closets." And then the truth spilled out. Lydia and Vince caught in the pantry. Staff whispered into radios. The door opened, and there they were, her shawl crooked, his shirt untucked. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was proof. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Evan stared at his mother like she was a stranger. His aunt tried to gather children toward the patio. Guests avoided eye contact, the way people do when they know they've seen too much. Jack didn't lay hands on anyone, but his fury tore through the room all the same. Overturned chairs, shattered centerpieces, the promise of family unraveling in public. I stood still, my dress trembling around me, thinking this was supposed to be the day two families joined. Instead, it was the night one family tore itself apart. The ballroom never fully recovered from that first crash. Even after staff rushed to sweep the shards and right the overturned chairs, the air stayed cracked, like glass that might hold another second but will never be whole again. Guests whispered in clusters near the walls, unsure whether to leave or pretend the evening could still go on. The band strummed a soft filler tune, eyes darting to one another for cues. No one wanted to be the first to declare the night ruined. I sat frozen at the head table, staring at the space where Jack had stood, the table still skewed at an angle from his fury. Evan hovered beside me, pale, lips pressed tight, as if holding back words that would never be strong enough. He kept whispering, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Each time I nodded, but the sound of glass breaking still echoed in my head louder than his voice. The whispers grew louder as Lydia reappeared, flanked by the venue manager. Her shawl was thrown unevenly over one shoulder, her lipstick smeared, just enough that the women noticed, though the men tried not to. Vince followed a step behind, holding his microphone in one hand like it could shield him, his tie askew, the confidence drained from his usual grin. A ripple passed through the room. Some gasped, some looked away, a few pulled out phones before thinking better of it. Lydia lifted her chin, the mask of a seasoned hostess sliding back into place. She even tried a smile, as if to say this was nothing but a misunderstanding. But the silence was merciless. Everyone had already filled in the blanks. Jack didn't return right away. He'd been led outside, I learned later, by 2 uncles and a cousin, still pacing, still muttering, his fists curling but never swinging. He wasn't a man of violence, but he was a man who needed the world to reflect his pain, and the only thing he could destroy was furniture. By the time he came back inside, his shirt was damp with sweat, his jaw locked tight. He didn't even look at Lydia. The MC, Vince, suddenly just a man in the wrong place at the worst time, tried to reclaim the room. "Folks," he said, voice cracking, "how about we get back to the music?" But no one clapped, no one cheered. He cleared his throat, tried again, then faltered under the weight of 200 eyes that would never see him as harmless again. My maid of honor, Claire, leaned in. "Do you want to go?" she whispered. The answer rose in me like a tide. Yes, but my feet wouldn't move, because leaving meant admitting it was over, that the night couldn't be patched, that my new family had split before the ink on the license was even dry. Guests began drifting toward the patio for air. Some lit cigarettes, though they hadn't smoked in years. Others just stared out at the lavender fields, pretending the cool night could wash the images from their minds. Children tugged on parents' sleeves, asking why Grandma was crying, why Grandpa was yelling, why the band had stopped. Inside, Jack finally spoke, voice low but sharp enough to carry. "We're done here." It wasn't addressed to Lydia alone. It was addressed to all of us, to the guests, to the families, to the future that had been promised hours earlier. Lydia flinched but didn't argue. She simply turned toward the doors, eyes fixed forward, refusing to show defeat. Vince tried to follow, but staff blocked him, guiding him through another exit. And just like that, the reception fractured. Some guests left immediately, coats draped over their arms. Others lingered, unsure whether they were supposed to finish their plates or dance one last song. The manager whispered apologies, offered partial refunds, promised to manage the fallout. Evan sat beside me, his hand hovering near mine but not daring to close the distance. "This isn't us," he murmured. "This isn't who we are." But it was. It was his family, and now it was mine. I lifted my glass of untouched champagne, stared into the bubbles going flat, and set it back down without drinking. In that small act, I realized something. No matter how carefully you plan, no matter how beautiful the hall or how kind the vows, one crack can split everything open. That night, my wedding stopped being about beginnings. It became a lesson in endings, the kind that don't come with paperwork yet, but with silence, stares, and the sound of a father tearing apart a ballroom because he couldn't tear apart his own grief. The patio lights flickered like nervous stars as more and more guests slipped outside. Some carried their wine glasses, others just their stunned expressions. The lavender fields beyond the stone wall looked calm, but the air on the patio carried the sharp tang of gossip. Whispers rose and fell. "Did you see them? With the MC, of all people. Poor Evan. Poor her." Inside, the ballroom was half empty, half chaos. Waiters in black vests tried to clear shattered glass without drawing more attention. The band packed up early, their polite smiles brittle. The dance floor, where I dreamed of spinning with Evan under the chandeliers, was abandoned. The DJ lights still blinked across the wood, searching for dancers who would never come. My own parents found me by the sweetheart table. My mother sat down beside me, her hand on my arm. She didn't say I'm sorry, because she knew apologies don't fit in places like this. Instead, she said, "You don't have to perform for anyone tonight. Not a soul." My father, steady as always, just asked, "Do you want us to take you home?" But I couldn't answer yet. I looked at Evan, who was still rooted in his chair, his hands pressed together as if in prayer. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "How do we ever face people again?" That was when I realized the cruelest part of it all. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about spectacle. It hadn't happened in private, something we could tuck away in family silence. It had happened here, in front of everyone we knew, everyone who mattered. And once a truth like that breaks open in public, it never goes back into hiding. Evan's best man approached, awkward and pale, holding out Evan's jacket like it could fix something. Maybe we should leave. Just the two of you." His voice shook with pity. Evan looked at me as if waiting for me to decide. For the first time all night, I felt the weight of what being his wife would mean, carrying not only his dreams, but also his family's ruins. I stood, smoothing the skirt of my dress, though it was already rumpled. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I stepped toward the patio doors. A hush rippled through the guests still inside. They turned, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to salvage the evening or shatter it completely. I took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Please eat. Dance if you want. But this night is over for us." A murmur swept through the crowd. Sympathy, shock, respect. My mother squeezed my hand. My father nodded once, proud. Evan didn't move. He stayed in his chair, staring down at his hands like a man trapped in a prayer he couldn't finish. As I stepped onto the patio, the cool air hit me like truth itself. Sharp, clean, impossible to ignore. Guests parted to let me pass, some offering murmured blessings, others just watching. The fireflies blinked across the lawn, indifferent to human disaster. I realized then that this was more than a ruined party. It was the first chapter of a marriage built on cracks I hadn't seen until now. A husband stunned into silence. A mother-in-law who had just burned her family's dignity. A father-in-law who answered betrayal with destruction. And me, the bride who had promised to join them, walking into the night with nothing left to celebrate. Morning came with the sound of silence, the kind that presses on your chest harder than any scream. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, veil tossed in a heap on the chair, hair still pinned in uneven curls that scratched against the pillow. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then the weight of the night before crashed back in. The tables overturned, Lydia's crooked shawl, Jack's voice echoing, "Check your closets." Downstairs, my parents were already at the kitchen table, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion. A plate of untouched pancakes sat cooling between them. My mother's eyes softened when I walked in, but my father stayed steady, as if waiting to see whether I would crumble or stand. "Coffee?" my mom asked gently. "Yes, please," I whispered, my throat raw from a night of holding back sobs. She slid a mug toward me, her hand brushing mine with the kind of love that doesn't need words. The phone rang before I could take a sip. My dad reached for it, but I stopped him. "Don't," I said. "Not yet." I already knew what waited on the other end. Whispers from relatives, questions from neighbors, maybe even reporters from the local paper. The story had left that ballroom the second guests had pulled out their phones. In towns like ours, scandal doesn't walk, it runs. I pulled my own phone from my bag and scrolled through the barrage of messages. Texts from bridesmaids, "We love you." "We're here for you." Messages from coworkers, "Take time." "Don't come in if you can't." And then, buried between them, one from Evan, "I can't believe this happened. Please, can we talk?" I didn't answer. What was there to say? That I was sorry his family had exploded in front of everyone we knew? That I wanted to pretend it hadn't happened? Silence felt like the only honest reply. By mid-morning, the news had spread across town. At the grocery store, two women whispered by the produce section, glancing at me as if I might suddenly appear among the apples. On Facebook, a blurry photo had already surfaced, Jack overturning a table, his arm frozen mid-swing. The caption read, "Local wedding ends in chaos." I wanted to scream that it wasn't just chaos. It was betrayal. It was humiliation. It was my wedding. Evan came by in the afternoon. My dad met him at the door, arms crossed, voice calm but firm. "She doesn't need this right now. I just want to explain," Evan pleaded. His face was drawn, dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked older than he had 12 hours ago. I stepped into the hallway, my arms folded tight across my chest. "Explain what?" I asked. My voice shook, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "That your mother chose the MC over her own husband? That your father destroyed a restaurant in front of everyone we know? That my wedding will be remembered as the night your family tore itself apart?" He flinched. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I never would have." "I believe you," I interrupted, softer now. "But believing you doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't make me forget the sound of glass shattering or the look on your father's face." He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "I need space," I said. "I can't carry your family secrets for you. Not now. Not ever." He nodded, defeated. "I'll wait," he whispered. Then he turned and left, shoulders hunched like a boy who just lost a game he never wanted to play. That night, the phone rang again, this time my mother-in-law's number. I stared at it until it went to voicemail. Later, I listened to her message. Her voice was clipped, polished, as if she were delivering a statement at one of her charity galas. "This isn't what it looks like. Please, don't judge me too quickly." But we all knew exactly what it looked like. There are some things you can't disguise with poise. By the second day, the town paper had picked it up. Society, family, and scandal at wedding. They didn't print names, but everyone knew. Photos spread, blurry shots of guests ushering children outside, the band carrying instruments through the side doors, Jack's white shirt stark against the overturned tables. At school, one of my students' parents messaged, "If you need anything, please let us know. Kids talk. We'll handle it." Even in whispers, the story was already legend. At night, I sat on my porch and tried to imagine the future. Could I stay married to Evan, knowing every holiday dinner would sit on the fault line of what his mother had done, what his father had destroyed? Could I raise children into a family whose first memory was chaos? The silence of the evening pressed in, crickets chirping like a soundtrack to a story I hadn't chosen. The worst part wasn't even losing the wedding I dreamed of. It was losing the illusion of safety, that families could be trusted to hold each other up, that love alone was enough. When I finally went inside, I found the crumpled napkin I had carried in my clutch. On it, weeks earlier, I had scribbled my vow to myself: "I will not leave myself behind to be loved." I pressed it flat against the table, smoothed the creases with my palm, and whispered it again. Because now, more than ever, I needed it to be true. By Monday, the story had a shape that didn't need my permission. The town paper ran its polite paragraph. The HOA Facebook group did not. A cousin posted a blurry photo of the overturned tables and then deleted it after 3 comments and 1 phone call from her mother. My school secretary pressed a hand to my arm and said, "You do not owe anyone a version." It helped. So did the casseroles that arrived like clockwork, each with a note: "Eat what you can, freeze the rest." The Midwest has a way of putting a fork in your hand when words won't land. The venue manager called mid-morning. "We've inventoried the damage," she said, voice soft, professional. "Mr. Whitaker, Jack, already asked us to send the bill to him directly. For your peace of mind, you're not liable. I'm also comping the band overage and half the food you couldn't serve." I thanked her until my voice gave out. Mercy in itemized form is still mercy. Evan texted again, "Coffee? Anywhere. I just want to sit with you." I agreed to meet him at the park, on a bench far from the swings where my students might see. He arrived looking wrung out, hair rumpled, suit abandoned for a faded college hoodie that made him look like the boy he used to be. We sat with coffee cups between our knees and watched a jogger pass twice. "I can't fix them," he said finally. "I don't even know where to start." "You can draw a line," I answered. "You can say what belongs in our house and what doesn't." He nodded, eyes on the gravel. "I told my mother she needs to apologize to my dad. To you. To everyone." He blew out a breath. "She said this is between her and Dad, and the rest is unfortunate optics. And your father? He wants to write checks until it looks like it never happened." He rubbed his jaw. "He also said a man's allowed to lose it once in his life." "Maybe," I said, "but not on my reception floor." We were quiet. A cardinal landed on the back of the bench, considered us, and flew off. Evan turned the cardboard sleeve on his cup until the seam faced him. "I want us," he said, simple and true in his way. "I don't know how to have us without them." "That's the question," I said. My vow was to you. But your parents aren't a footnote. They're the first chapter. That afternoon, Lydia asked to meet. We chose a cafe 2 towns over where people might let us be human. She arrived immaculate in the way people do when they've lost control and fall back on polish. She did not hug me. She did not cry. Coffee, she asked the barista like a regular ordering a usual. I will not discuss details, she began when we sat. But I will say that marriages, long marriages, are complicated. Mine was 2 hours old, I said. It didn't get a chance to be complicated. Her mouth flattened. You're angry. I understand. I'm careful, I corrected. There's a difference. She laid 2 palms on the table. Jack and I will handle our part. You and Evan should handle yours. Don't let this moment define you. The word moment hit me like a chill. You turned my wedding into a spectacle, I said, quieter than I felt. You don't get to define a smaller word for it. Something flinched in her eyes, then smoothed. If I issue a statement, this isn't a gala, I said. No statements. I stood before my voice shook. I wish you the courage to tell the truth where it counts. Not to me. To yourself. I met Jack 2 days later at his office above the dealership. Framed jerseys on the wall. A photo of him shaking hands with a senator. A neat stack of contracts turned square to the desk's edge. He didn't offer coffee. He did not sit behind the desk like a king. He sat in the visitor chair like a man trying for humility and not quite making it. I'm sorry for what you saw, he said. The sentence missed the mark even as it tried. I'm sorry for what you did, I answered. To the people carrying trays, to the kids who will remember the sound of glass, to me. He exhaled. I paid the invoices. Money is the smallest piece, I said. He nodded once, as if conceding a point in a game that shouldn't be a game. I lost my temper. That's not who I am. It was, I said gently. For 20 minutes, it was exactly who you were. We sat in that. He picked up a paperweight, set it down, lined it with the edge of a blotter. Are you leaving my son? I'm deciding whether I can build a home on a floor that cracked, I said. I'm giving him a chance to show me he can pour a new foundation. Without applause, Jack's face did something I hadn't seen before. Softened, maybe, or surrendered. He's a good man. I know, I said. That's why I'm still deciding. On Thursday, the MC's agency called to extend their regrets. An email followed with legal language about mutual release. There was a line about Vince taking a leave. The message did that corporate thing where every sentence removed a person from the center. I closed the laptop and walked to the sink, letting the water run until it was cold enough to sting. Gifts sat stacked in my parents' dining room like a second audience, all those bows and careful cards. Claire and I spent an afternoon writing notes that weren't in any of the templates. Thank you for your kindness on a hard night. We are pausing to breathe. We appreciate your generosity, and will let you know how to return anything you'd rather reclaim. We printed 100 and tucked them into envelopes until my fingertips felt like paper. On Friday, our officiant, who also happens to be the pastor from my childhood church, stopped by with a grocery bag and a look that said she would stay if asked and leave if not. When a roof collapses, she said, you don't stand under it to argue about shingles. You step into the yard and decide what to rebuild. I'm in the yard, I said. Good, she said. Then don't rush, because other people are cold. That night, Evan rang the bell. My parents gave us the porch. He stood on the top step with his hands in his pockets and said, I've scheduled therapy. For me. First. I can't fix them, but I can learn where I end and they begin. I believed him. It didn't solve anything. It solved the part that was his to solve. Here are my conditions, I said, hearing how unromantic that sounded and saying it anyway. No more minimizing. No more Mom had a moment. A real apology to the staff. Payment not just for what broke, but for tips missed when the night ended early. And distance until there's evidence of change. He swallowed. They'll call it punishment. They can call it a weather report, I said. I'm telling you where I can live. We stood there under the porch light like teenagers, like widows, like people who had learned too much too fast. A pickup rolled by. A neighbor lifted 2 fingers from the wheel, the small-town salute that means I see you and I won't make this harder. When Evan left, I wrote the sentence again on a fresh card and taped it inside the pantry. Our pantry, not the venue's. I will not leave myself behind to be loved. I wanted it where I keep flour and sugar, the daily things, the things that make a home rise. By Saturday the roomers had burned themselves down to coals. You can only stare at one fire so long before life asks you to take out the trash and switch the laundry. I ran errands in a ball cap and sunglasses I didn't need. People were kinder than I feared. A cashier slipped me a bouquet that had lost one bloom and said, "It's still pretty." I put it in water on the passenger seat and drove around the lake twice before going home. I wish I could say there was one moment that decided it all, one last straw, one last plea, one neat cinematic hinge. There wasn't. There was the steady math of days, the calls Evan took outside and brought back inside with quieter eyes, the text from Lydia that said, "We must control the narrative," which told me she still hadn't met the truth, the voicemail from Jack to my father offering to cover any remaining costs as if cost meant plates. And there was me, sleeping more, crying less, discovering that calm can be a verdict. The day I finally decided didn't look like a decision at first. No slammed doors, no shouting matches. Just a gray Sunday morning, quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the scrape of my pen across a yellow legal pad. I had written 3 columns at the top: stay, try, leave. Under each, I scribbled notes until the ink blurred. Under stay, there was only one word: love. Under try, I filled a dozen lines: therapy, boundaries, apologies, time. Under leave, the words came sharp and fast: peace, safety, dignity, myself. When I looked down at the page, the answer was obvious. Evan came by that afternoon. He sat across from me at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where birthday candles had been blown out and bills had been sorted. He looked smaller somehow, like the last weeks had chipped away at him. "I've started therapy," he said, almost defensively. "I've drawn lines with Mom and Dad. I'm trying." "I know," I said softly, "and I believe you." His eyes lifted, hopeful. "Then we can." I shook my head. "But I can't build a marriage in a house that's already on fire. Even if you stand with me, the smoke is everywhere. And I promised myself I would never leave me behind to be loved." The words hung between us. He blinked hard, then nodded, tears rising but held back. "So this is it. This is it," I said, and my voice didn't shake. We sat a long moment, listening to the clock tick, the most ordinary sound in the world marking the end of something extraordinary. Then he stood, pushed in his chair, and said, "I'll always hope for you. I'll always wish you peace," I replied. And that was the last time we sat at that table together. The days after felt strangely light. Not happy, not free exactly, but unburdened. The gossip slowed, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. The venue mailed back our deposit with a sympathy note. The gifts were returned with careful cards. My students drew me pictures of smiling stick figures under rainbows, and for once I didn't correct their spelling mistakes. I moved into a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy. Just 2 rooms, sunlight in the morning, and a balcony where I planted lavender in clay pots. Not the manicured lavender from the wedding fields, but rougher, humbler stalks that swayed in the wind. They were mine. Sometimes at night I still heard echoes of that reception. The crash of glass, the hush after Jack's announcement, the whispers that rippled through the hall. Sometimes I saw Lydia's eyes, polished and hollow, Vince's crooked tie, Evan's pale silence. But those memories didn't own me anymore. They were just pieces of a story that no longer defined me. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies flicker across the street. I thought of the vow I'd written on that napkin weeks ago: I will not leave myself behind to be loved. I whispered it out loud, not as a plea this time, but as a truth. My wedding day was supposed to be the beginning of a marriage. Instead, it became the day I lost a family I never truly had. But it also became the day I chose myself, the day I planted the first seeds of a future built on honesty, not spectacle. And as the night air wrapped around me, I realized, sometimes survival is the most radical love story of all.